Chapter 3. The Lawrence Boy. "Joe! Joe! Where are you?" cried Meg, at the foot of the garret stairs. "Here!" answered a husky voice from above, and running up, Meg found her sister eating apples and crying over the heir of Redcliffe, wrapped up in a comforter on an old three-legged sofa by the sunny window. This was Joe's favorite refuge, and here she loved to retire with half a dozen russets and a nice book to enjoy the quiet and society of a pet rat who lived nearby and didn't mind her a particle. As Meg appeared, Scrabble whisked into his hole. Joe shook the tears off her face and waited to hear the news. "Such fun! Only see! A regular note of invitation from Mrs. Gardner for tomorrow night," cried Meg, waving the precious paper and then proceeding to read it with girlish delight. "Mrs. Gardner would be happy to see Miss March and Miss Josephine at a little dance on New Year's Eve. Marmee is willing we should go. Now what shall we wear?" "What's the use of asking that when you know we shall wear our poplins because we haven't got anything else?" answered Joe with her mouth full. "If only I had a silk," sighed Meg. "Mother says I may when I'm 18 perhaps, but 2 years is an everlasting time to wait." "I'm sure our pops look good as silk, and they are nice enough for us. Yours is as good as new, but I forgot the burn and the tear in mine. Whatever shall I do? The burn shows badly, and I can't take any out." "You must sit still all you can and keep your back out of sight. The front is okay. I shall have a new ribbon for my hair, and Marmee will lend me her little pearl pin, and my new slippers are lovely, and my gloves will do, though they aren't quite as nice as I'd like. Mine are spoiled with lemonade, and I can't get any new ones, so I shall have to go without," said Joe, who never troubled herself much about dress. "You must have gloves, or I won't go," cried Meg decidedly. "Gloves are more important than anything else. You can't dance without them, and if you don't, I should so be mortified." "Then I'll stay still. I don't care much for company dancing. It's no fun to go sailing around. I like to fly about and cut capers." "You can't ask Mother for new ones. They are so expensive, and you are so careless. She said when you spoiled the others that she shouldn't get you any more this winter. Can't you make them work?" asked Meg anxiously. "I can hold them crumpled up in my hand so no one will know how stained they are. That's all I can do." "No, I'll tell you how we can manage. Each wear one good one and carry a bad one, don't you see?" "Your hands are bigger than mine, and you will stretch my glove dreadfully," began Meg, whose glove were a tender point with her. "Then I'll go without. I don't care what people say," cried Joe, taking up her book. "You may have it, you may, only don't stain it, and do behave nicely. Don't put your hands behind you, or stare, or say Christopher Columbus, will you? Don't worry about me. I'll be as prim as I can get and not get into any scrapes if I can help it. Now go and answer your note and let me finish this splendid story." So Meg went away to accept with thanks, look over her dress, and sing blithely as she did up her one real lace frill, while Joe finished her story, her 4 apples, and had a game of romps with Scrabble. On New Year's Eve the parlor was deserted, for the 2 younger girls played dressing maids, and the 2 elder were absorbed in the all-important business of getting ready for the party. Simple as their toilets were, there was a great deal of running up and down, laughing and talking, and at one time a strong smell of burned hair pervaded the house. Meg wanted a few curls about her face, and Joe undertook to pinch the papered locks with a pair of hot tongs. "Ought they to smoke like that?" asked Beth, from her perch on the bed. "It's the dampness drying," replied Joe. "What a queer smell! It's like burned feathers," observed Amy, smoothing her own pretty curls with a superior air. "There, now I'll take off the papers, and you'll see a cloud of little ringlets," said Joe, putting down the tongs. She did take off the papers, but no cloud of ringlets appeared, for the hair came with the papers, and the horrified hairdresser laid a roll of little scorched bundles on the bureau before her victim. "Oh, no! What have you done? I'm spoiled! I can't go! My hair! Oh, my hair!" wailed Meg, looking with despair at the uneven frizzle on her forehead. "Just my luck. You shouldn't have asked me to do it. I always spoil everything. I'm so sorry, but the tongs were too hot, and so I've made a mess," groaned poor Joe, regarding the black pancakes with tears of regret. "It isn't spoiled. Just frizzle it and tie your ribbon so the ends come on your forehead a bit, and it will look like the latest fashion. I've seen many girls do it so," said Amy consolingly. "Serves me right for trying to be fine. I wish I'd let my hair alone," cried Meg petulantly. So do I. It was so smooth and pretty, but it will soon grow out again, said Beth, coming to kiss and comfort the shorn sheep. After various lesser mishaps, Meg was finished at last, and by the united exertions of the family, Jo's hair was got up and her dress on. They looked very well in their simple suits, Meg in a silvery drab with a blue velvet snood, lace frills, and the pearl pin. Jo in maroon with a stiff, gentlemanly linen collar and a white chrysanthemum or two for her only ornament. Each put on one nice light glove and carried one soiled one, and all pronounced the effect quite easy and quite fine. Meg's high-heeled slippers were very tight and hurt her, though she would not own it, and Jo's 19 hairpins all seemed stuck straight into her head, which was not exactly comfortable, but dear me, let us be elegant or die. Have a good time, dearies, said Mrs. March as the sisters went daintily down the walk. Don't eat much supper, and come away at 11 when I send Hannah for you. As the gate clashed behind them, a voice cried from a window, Girls, girls, have you both got nice pocket handkerchiefs? Yes, yes, spandy nice, and Meg has cologne on hers, cried Jo, adding with a laugh as they went on. I do believe Marmee would ask that if we were all running away from an earthquake. It's one of her aristocratic tastes, and quite proper, for a real lady is always known by neat boots, gloves, and handkerchief, replied Meg, who had a good many little aristocratic tastes of her own. Now don't forget to keep the bad breath out of sight, Jo. Is my sash right, and does my hair look very bad? Said Meg, as she turned from the glass in Mrs. Gardner's dressing room after a prolonged prink. I know I shall forget. If you see me doing anything wrong, just remind me by a wink, will you? Returned Jo, giving her collar a twitch and her head a hasty brush. No, winking isn't ladylike. I'll lift my eyebrows if anything is wrong, and not if you are all right. Now hold your shoulders straight, and take short steps, and don't shake hands if you are introduced to anyone. It isn't the thing. How do you learn all the proper ways? I never can. Isn't that music gay? Down they went, feeling a trifle timid, for they seldom went to parties, and informal as this little gathering was, it was an event to them. Mrs. Gardner, a stately old lady, greeted them kindly, and handed them over to the eldest of her 6 daughters. Meg knew Sally and was at her ease very soon, but Jo, who didn't care much for girls or gossip, stood about with her back carefully against the wall and felt as much out of place as a colt in a flower garden. Half a dozen jovial lads were talking about skates in another part of the room, and she longed to go and join them, for skating was one of the joys of her life. She telegraphed her wish to Meg, but the eyebrows went up so alarmingly that she dared not stir. No one came to talk to her, and one by one the group near her dwindled away till she was left alone. She could not roam about and amuse herself, for the burned breadth would show, so she stared at people rather forlornly until the dancing began. Meg was asked at once, and the tight slippers tripped about so briskly that none would have guessed the pain their wearer suffered so smilingly. Jo saw a big red-headed youth approaching her corner, and fearing he meant to engage her, she slipped into a curtained recess, intending to peep and enjoy herself in peace. Unfortunately, another bashful person had chosen the same refuge, for, as the curtain fell behind her, she found herself face to face with the Lawrence boy. "Dear me, I didn't know anyone was here," stammered Jo, preparing to back out as speedily as she had bounced in. But the boy laughed and said pleasantly, though he looked a little startled, "Don't mind me. Stay if you like." "Shan't I disturb you?" "Not a bit. I only came here because I don't know many people and felt rather strange at first, you know." "So did I. Don't go away, please, unless you'd rather." The boy sat down again and looked at his pumps till Jo said, trying to be polite and easy, "I think I've had the pleasure of seeing you before. You live near us, don't you?" "Next door," and he looked up and laughed outright, for Jo's prim manner was rather funny when he remembered how they had chatted about cricket when he brought the cat home. That put Jo at her ease, and she laughed too, as she said, in her heartiest way, "We did have such a good time over your nice Christmas present." "Grandpa sent it, but you put it into his head, didn't you now?" "How is your cat, Miss March?" asked the boy, trying to look sober while his black eyes shone with fun. "Nicely, thank you, Mr. Lawrence, but I am not Miss March. I am only Jo," returned the young lady. "I'm not Mr. Lawrence. I'm only Laurie." "Laurie Lawrence. What an odd name." "My first name is Theodore, but I don't like it, for the fellows called me Dora, so I made them say Laurie instead. I hate my name too, so sentimental. I wish everyone would say Jo instead of Josephine. How did you make the boys stop calling you Dora? I thrashed 'em. I can't thrash Aunt March, so I suppose I shall have to bear it. And Jo resigned herself with a sigh. Don't you like to dance, Miss Jo? Asked Laurie, looking as if he thought the name suited her. I like it well enough if there is plenty of room and everyone is lively. In a place like this, I'm sure to upset something, tread on people's toes, or do something dreadful, so I keep out of mischief and let Meg sail about. Don't you dance? Sometimes. You see, I've been abroad a good many years, and haven't been into company enough yet to know how you do things here. Abroad! Cried Jo. Oh, tell me about it. I love dearly to hear people describe their travels. Laurie didn't seem to know where to begin, but Jo's eager questions soon sent him going, and he told her how he had been at school in Vevey, where the boys never wore hats and had a fleet of boats on the lake, and for holiday fun went on walking trips about Switzerland with their teachers. Don't I wish I'd been there, cried Jo. Did you go to Paris? We spent last winter there. Can you speak French? We were not allowed to speak anything else at Vevey. Do say some. I can read it, but can't pronounce. Que nomme c'était Jeune Demoiselle en les pantoufles jolies? Said Laurie good-naturedly. How nicely you do it. Let me see. You said, who is the young lady in the pretty slippers, didn't you? Oui, mademoiselle. It is my sister Margaret, and you knew it was. Do you really think she's pretty? Yes, she makes me think of the German girl. She looks so fresh and quiet and dances like a lady. Jo quite glowed with pleasure at this boyish praise of her sister and stored it up to report to Meg later. Both peeped and criticized and chatted until they felt like old acquaintances. Laurie's bashfulness soon wore off, for Jo's gentlemanly demeanor amused and set him at his ease, and Jo was her merry self again because her dress was forgotten and nobody was lifting their eyebrows at her. She liked the Lawrence boy better than ever and took several good looks at him so that she might describe him to the girls, for they had no brothers, very few male cousins, and boys were almost unknown creatures to them. Curly black hair, brown skin, big black eyes, handsome nose, fine teeth, small hands and feet, taller than I am, very polite for a boy, and altogether jolly. I wonder how old he is. It was on the tip of Jo's tongue to ask, but she checked herself in time, and with unusual tact tried to find out in a roundabout way. I suppose you are going to college soon. I see you pegging away at your books. No, I mean studying hard. And Jo blushed at the dreadful pegging which had escaped her. Laurie smiled, but didn't seem shocked, and answered with a shrug, Not for a year or two. I won't go before 17, anyway. Aren't you but 15? Asked Jo, looking at the tall lad, whom she had imagined 17 already. 16 next month. How I wish I was going to college. You don't look as if you liked it. I hate it. Nothing but grinding or skylarking, and I don't like the way fellows do either in this country. What do you like? To live in Italy and to enjoy myself in my own way. Jo wanted very much to ask what his own way was, but his black brows looked rather threatening as he knit them together, so she changed the subject by saying, as her foot kept time, That's a splendid polka. Why don't you go and try it? If you'll come too, he answered with a gallant little bow. I can't, for I told Meg I wouldn't, because... There Jo stopped, and looked undecided whether to tell or to laugh. Because what? Asked Laurie curiously. You won't tell? Never. Well, I have a bad trick of standing before the fire, and so I burn my frocks, and I scorched this one, and though it's nicely mended, it shows, and Meg told me to keep still so no one would see it. You may laugh if you want to. It is funny, I know. But Laurie didn't laugh. He only looked down a minute, and the expression of his face puzzled Jo when he said very gently, Never mind that. I'll tell you how we can manage. There's a long hall out there, and we can dance grandly, and no one will see us. Please come. Jo thanked him and gladly went, wishing she had 2 neat gloves, when she saw the nice pearl-colored ones her partner wore. The hall was empty, and they had a grand polka, for Laurie danced well, and he taught her the German step, which delighted Jo, being full of swing and spring. When the music stopped, they sat down on the stairs to get their breath, and Laurie was in the midst of an account of a students' festival at Heidelberg, when Meg appeared in search of her sister. She beckoned, and Jo reluctantly followed her into a side room, where she found her on a sofa, holding her foot and looking pale. "I've sprained my ankle. That stupid high heel turned and gave me a sad wrench. It aches so I can hardly stand, and I don't know how I'm ever going to get home," she said, rocking to and fro with pain. "I knew you'd hurt your feet with those silly shoes. I'm sorry, but I don't see what you can do, except get a carriage or stay here all night," answered Jo, softly rubbing the poor ankle as she spoke. "I can't have a carriage without its costing ever so much. I dare say I can't get one at all, for most people come in their own, and it's a long way to the stable, and no one to send." "I'll go." "No, indeed, it's past 9 and dark as Egypt. I can't stop here, for the house is full. Sally has some girls staying with her. I'll rest till Hannah comes, and then I'll do the best I can." "I'll ask Laurie. He'll go," said Jo, looking relieved as the idea occurred to her. "Mercy, no! Don't ask or tell anyone. Get me my rubbers and put these slippers with our things. I can't dance any more, but as soon as supper is over, watch for Hannah and tell me the minute she comes." "They're going out to supper now. I'll stay with you. I'd rather." "No, dear, run along, and bring me some coffee. I'm so tired I can't stir." So Meg reclined with rubbers well hidden, and Jo went blundering away to the dining room, which she found after going into a china closet and opening the door of a room where old Mr. Gardner was taking a little private refreshment. Making a dart at the table, she secured the coffee, which she immediately spilled, thereby making the front of her dress just as bad as the back. "Oh dear, what a blunderbuss I am!" exclaimed Jo, finishing Meg's glove by scrubbing her gown with it. "Can I help you?" said a friendly voice, and there was Laurie with a full cup in one hand and a plate of ice in the other. "I was trying to get something for Meg, who is very tired, and someone shook me, and here I am in a nice state," answered Jo, glancing dismally from the stained skirt to the coffee-colored glove. "Too bad. I was looking for someone to give this to. May I take it to your sister?" "Oh, thank you. I'll show you where she is. I don't offer to take it myself, for I shall only get into another scrape if I did." Jo led the way, and as if used to waiting on ladies, Laurie drew up a little table, brought a second installment of coffee and ice for Jo, and was so obliging that even particular Meg pronounced him a nice boy. They had a merry time over the bonbons and mottos, and were in the midst of a quiet game of buzz with 2 or 3 other young people who had strayed in, when Hannah appeared. Meg forgot her foot and rose so quickly that she was forced to catch hold of Jo with an exclamation of pain. "Hush, don't say anything," she whispered, adding aloud, "It's nothing. I turned my foot a little, that's all," and limped upstairs to put her things on. Hannah scolded, Meg cried, and Jo was at her wit's end, till she decided to take things into her own hands. Slipping out, she ran down, and finding a servant, asked if he could get her a carriage. It happened to be a hired waiter who knew nothing about the neighborhood, and Jo was looking around for help when Laurie, who had heard what she said, came up and offered his grandfather's carriage, which had just come for him, he said. "But it's so early. You can't mean to go yet," began Jo, looking relieved, but hesitating to accept his offer. "I always go early. I do, truly. Please let me take you home. It's all on my way, you know, and it rains, they say." That settled it, and telling him of Meg's mishap, Jo gratefully accepted and rushed up to bring down the rest of the party. Hannah hated rain as much as a cat does, so she made no trouble, and they rolled away in a luxurious close carriage, feeling very festive and elegant. Laurie went on the box so Meg could keep her foot up, and the girls talked over their party in freedom. "I had a capital time. Did you?" asked Jo, rumpling up her hair and making herself comfortable. "Yes, till I hurt myself. Sally's friend, Annie Moffat, took a fancy to me and asked me to come and spend a week with her when Sally does. She's going in the spring when the opera comes, and it will be perfectly splendid if Mother only lets me go," answered Meg, cheering up at the thought. "I saw you dancing with the red-headed man I ran away from. Was he nice?" "Oh, very. His hair is auburn, not red, and he was very polite, and I had a delicious redowa with him. He looked like a grasshopper in a fit when he did the new step. Laurie and I couldn't help laughing. Did you hear us?" "No, but it was very rude. What were you about all that time hidden away there?" Jo told her adventures, and by the time she had finished, they were home. With many thanks, they said good night and crept in, hoping to disturb no one, but the instant their door creaked, 2 little nightcaps bobbed up, and 2 sleepy but eager voices cried out, "Tell about the party! Tell about the party!" With what Meg called a great want of manners, Jo had saved some bonbons for the little girls, and they soon subsided after hearing the most thrilling events from the evening. "I declare, it really seems like being a fine young lady to come home from the party in a carriage and sit in my dressing gown with a maid to wait on me," said Meg, as Jo bound up her foot with arnica and brushed her hair. "I don't believe fine young ladies enjoy themselves a bit more than we do, in spite of our burned hair, old gowns, 1 glove apiece, and tight slippers that sprain our ankles when we are silly enough to wear them." And I think Jo was quite right. Chapter 4. Burdens. "Oh dear, how hard it does seem to take up our packs and go on," sighed Meg, the morning after the party. For now that the holidays were over, the week of merrymaking did not fit her for going on easily with a task she had never liked. "I wish it was Christmas or New Year's all the time. Wouldn't it be fun?" answered Jo, yawning dismally. "We shouldn't enjoy ourselves half so much as we do now. But it does seem so nice to have little suppers and bouquets, and go to parties, and drive home, and read and rest and not work. It's like other people, you know, and I always envy girls who do such things. I'm so fond of luxury," said Meg, trying to decide which of the 2 shabby gowns was the least shabby. "Well, we can't have it, so don't let us grumble, but shoulder our bundles and trudge along as cheerfully as Marmee does. I'm sure Aunt March is a regular old man of the sea to me, but I suppose when I've learned to carry her without complaining, she will tumble off, or get so light that I shan't mind her at all." This idea tickled Jo's fancy and put her in good spirits, but Meg didn't brighten, for her burden, consisting of 4 spoiled children, seemed heavier than ever. She hadn't heart enough even to make herself as pretty as usual by putting on a blue neck ribbon and dressing her hair in the most becoming way. "Where's the use of looking nice when no one sees me but those cross children, and no one cares whether I'm pretty or not?" she muttered, shutting her drawer with a jerk. "I shall have to toil and moil all my days, with only little bits of fun now and then, and get old and ugly and sour because I'm poor and can't enjoy my life as other girls do. It's a shame." So Meg went down, wearing an injured look, and wasn't at all agreeable at breakfast time. Everyone seemed rather out of sorts and inclined to croak. Beth had a headache and lay on the sofa, trying to comfort herself with a cat and 3 kittens. Amy was fretting because her lessons were not learned, and she couldn't find her rubbers. Jo would whistle and make a great racket getting ready. Mrs. March was very busy trying to finish a letter, which must go at once, and Hannah had the grumps, for being up late did not suit her. "There never was such a cross family," cried Jo, losing her temper when she had upset an inkstand, broken both bootlaces, and sat down upon her hat. "You're the crossest person in it," returned Amy, washing out the sum that was all wrong with the tears that had fallen on her slate. "Beth, if you don't keep those horrid cats down in the cellar, I'll have them drowned," exclaimed Meg angrily, as she tried to get rid of the kitten, which had scrambled up her back and stuck like a burr just out of her reach. Jo laughed, Meg scolded, Beth implored, and Amy wailed, because she couldn't remember how much 9 times 12 was. "Girls, do be quiet 1 minute. I must get this off by the early mail, and you drive me distracted with your worry," cried Mrs. March, crossing out the 3rd spoiled sentence in her letter. There was a momentary lull, broken by Hannah, who stalked in, laid 2 hot turnovers on the table, and stalked out again. These turnovers were an institution, and the girls called them muffs, for they had no others, and found the hot pies very comforting to their hands on cold mornings. Hannah never forgot to make them, no matter how busy or grumpy she might be, for the walk was long and bleak. The poor things got no other lunch, and were seldom home before 2. "Cuddle your cats and get over your headache, Bethy. Goodbye, Marmee. We are a set of rascals this morning, but we'll come home regular angels. Now then, Meg." And Jo tramped away, feeling that the Pilgrims were not setting out as they ought to do. They always looked back before turning the corner, for their mother was always at the window to nod and smile and wave her hand to them. Somehow it seemed as if they couldn't have got through the day without that, for whatever their mood might be, the last glimpse of that motherly face was sure to affect them like sunshine. If Marmee shook her fist instead of kissing her hand to us, it would serve us right, for more ungrateful wretches than we are were never seen, cried Jo, taking remorseful satisfaction in a snowy walk in the bitter wind. Don't use such dreadful expressions, said Meg, from the depths of the veil in which she had shrouded herself like a nun sick of the world. I like good strong words that mean something, replied Jo, catching her hat as it took a leap off her head, preparatory to flying away altogether. Call yourself any names you'd like, but I am neither a rascal nor a wretch, and I don't choose to be called so. You're a blighted being, and decidedly cross today because you can't sit in the lap of luxury all the time. Poor dear, just wait until I make my fortune, and you shall revel in carriages and ice cream and high-heeled slippers and posies and red-headed boys to dance with. How ridiculous you are, Jo. But Meg laughed at the nonsense and felt better in spite of herself. Lucky for you I am, for if I put on crushed airs and try to be dismal as you do, we should be in a nice state. Thank goodness I can always find something funny to keep me up. Don't croak any more, but come home jolly. There's a dear. Jo gave her sister an encouraging pat on the shoulder as they parted for the day, each going a different direction, each hugging her little warm turnover, and each trying to be cheerful in spite of the wintry weather, hard work, and the unsatisfied pleasures of desire-loving youth. When Mr. March lost his property in trying to help an unfortunate friend, the two oldest girls begged to be allowed to do something toward their own support at least. Believing that they could not begin too early to cultivate energy, industry, and independence, their parents consented, and both fell to work, with hearty goodwill which, in spite of all obstacles, is sure to succeed at last. Margaret found a place as a nursery governess and felt rich with her small salary. As she said, she was fond of luxury, and her chief trouble was poverty. She found it harder to bear than the others because she could remember a time when home was beautiful, life full of ease and pleasure, and want of any kind was unknown. She tried not to be envious or discontented, but it was very natural that the young girl should long for pretty things, gay friends, accomplishments, and a happy life. At the King she daily saw all she wanted, for the children's older sisters were just out, and Meg caught frequent glimpses of dainty ball dresses and bouquets, heard lively gossip about theaters, concerts, sleighing parties, and merrymakings of all kinds, and saw money lavished on trifles which would have been so precious to her. She seldom complained, but a sense of injustice made her feel bitter toward everyone sometimes, for she had not yet learned to know how rich she was in the blessings which alone can make life happy. Jo happened to suit Aunt March, who was lame and needed an active person to wait upon her. The childless old lady had offered to adopt one of the girls when the troubles came, and was much offended when her offer was declined. Other friends told the Marches that they had lost all chance of being remembered in the rich old lady's will, but the unworldly Marches only said, "We can't give up our girls for a dozen fortunes. Rich or poor, we will keep together and be happy in one another." The old lady wouldn't speak to them for a time, but happened to meet Jo at a friend's. Something in her comical face and blunt manner struck the old lady's fancy, and she proposed to take her on as a companion. This did not suit Jo at all, but she accepted the place since nothing better had appeared, and to everyone's surprise got on remarkably well with her irascible relative. There was an occasional tempest, and once Jo had marched home declaring she could bear it no longer, but Aunt March always cleared up quickly and sent for her back again with such urgency that she could not refuse, for in her heart she rather liked the peppery old lady. I suspect that the real attraction was a large library of fine books, which was left to dust and spiders since Uncle March had died. Jo remembered the kind old gentleman who used to let her build railroads and bridges with his big dictionaries, tell her stories about the queer pictures in his Latin books, and buy her cards of gingerbread whenever he met her in the street. The dim, dusty room, with the busts staring down from the tall bookcases, the cozy chairs, the globes, and best of all, the wilderness of books, in which she could wander where she liked, made the library a region of bliss to her. Aunt March took her nap or was busy with company, and Jo would hurry to this quiet place, and curling herself up in the easy-chair, devoured poetry, romance, history, travels, and pictures like a regular bookworm. But like all happiness, it did not last long, for as sure as she had just reached the heart of the story, the sweetest verse of the song, or the most perilous adventure of her traveler, a shrill voice called, "Josephine! Josephine!" And she had to leave her paradise to wind yarn, wash the poodle, or read Beltram's essays by the hour together. Jo's ambition was to do something very splendid. What it was she had no idea as of yet, but left it for a time to tell her. And, meanwhile, found her greatest affliction in the fact that she couldn't read, run, and ride as much as she liked. A quick temper, a sharp tongue, and a restless spirit were always getting her into scrapes, and her life was a series of ups and downs which were both comic and pathetic. But the training she received at Aunt March's was just what she needed, and the thought that she was doing something to support herself made her happy, in spite of the perpetual, "Josephine!" Beth was too bashful to go to school. It had been tried, but she suffered so much that it was given up, and she did her lessons at home with her father. Even when he went away and her mother was called to devote her skill and energy to Soldiers' Aid societies, Beth went faithfully on by herself and did the best she could. She was a housewifely little creature, and helped Hannah keep home neat and comfortable for the workers, never thinking of any reward but to be loved. Long, quiet days she spent, not lonely or idle, for her little world was peopled with imaginary friends, and she was by nature a busy bee. There were 6 dolls to be taken up and dressed every morning, for Beth was a child still, and loved her pets as well as ever. Not one whole or handsome one among them. All were outcasts till Beth took them in, for when her sisters outgrew these dolls, they passed to her because Amy would have nothing old or ugly. Beth cherished them all the more tenderly for that very reason, and set up a hospital for infirm dolls. No pins were ever stuck into their cotton vitals, no harsh words or blows were ever given them, no neglect ever saddened the heart of the most repulsive. But all were fed and clothed, nursed and caressed with an affection which never failed. One forlorn fragment of dollanity that had belonged to Jo and, having led a tempestuous life, was left a wreck in the rag-bag, from which dreary poorhouse it was rescued by Beth and taken to her refuge. Having no top on its head, she tied on a neat little cap, and as both arms and legs were gone, she hid these deficiencies by folding it in a blanket and devoting her best bed to this chronic invalid. If anyone had known the care lavished on that dolly, I think it would have touched their hearts even as they laughed. She brought it bits of bouquets, she read to it, took it out to breathe the air hidden under her coat. She sang it lullabies and never went to bed without kissing its dirty face and whispering tenderly, "I do hope you'll have a good night, my poor dear." Beth had her troubles as well as the others, and not being an angel but a very human little girl, she often wept a little weep, as Jo said, because she couldn't take music lessons and have a fine piano. She loved music so dearly, tried so hard to learn, and practiced away so patiently at the jingling old instrument, that it did seem as if someone, not to hint Aunt March, ought to help her. Nobody did, however, and nobody saw Beth wipe the tears off the yellowed keys that wouldn't keep in tune when she was all alone. She sang like a little lark about her work, never was too tired to play for Marmee and the girls, and day after day said hopefully to herself, "I know I'll get my music sometime, if I'm good." There are many Beths in the world, shy and quiet, sitting in corners till needed, and living for others so cheerfully that no one sees the sacrifices till the little cricket on the hearth stops chirping, and the sweet sunshiny presence vanishes, leaving silence and shadows behind. If anybody had asked Amy what the greatest trial of her life was, she would have answered at once, "My nose." When she was a baby, Jo had accidentally dropped her into the coal hood, and Amy insisted that the fall had ruined her nose forever. It was not big nor red, like poor Petrea's. It was only rather flat, and all the pinching in the world could not give it an aristocratic point. No one minded it but herself, and it was doing its best to grow, but Amy felt deeply the want of a Grecian nose, and drew whole sheets of handsome ones to console herself. Little Raphael, as her sisters called her, had a decided talent for drawing, and was never so happy as when copying flowers, designing fairies, or illustrating stories with queer specimens of art. Her teachers complained that instead of doing her sums, she covered her slate with animals, the blank pages of her atlas were used to copy maps on, and caricatures of the most ludicrous description came fluttering out of all of her books at unlucky moments. She got through her lessons as well as she could, and managed to escape reprimands by being a model of deportment. She was a great favorite with her mates, being good-tempered and possessing the happy art of pleasing without effort. Her little airs and graces were much admired. So were her accomplishments, for beside her drawing, she could play 12 tunes, crochet, and read French without mispronouncing more than 2/3 of the words. She had a plaintive way of saying, "When Papa was rich, we did so-and-so," which was very touching, and her long words were considered perfectly elegant by the girls. Amy was in a fair way to be spoiled, and everyone petted her, and her small vanities and her selfishness were growing nicely. One thing, however, rather quenched the vanities. She had to wear her cousin's clothes. Now Florence's mamma hadn't a particle of taste, and Amy suffered deeply at having to wear red instead of a blue bonnet, unbecoming gowns, and fussy aprons that did not fit. Everything was good, well made, and little worn, but Amy's artistic eyes were much afflicted, especially this winter, when her school dress was a dull purple with yellow dots and had no trim. "My only comfort," she said to Meg, with tears in her eyes, "is that Mother doesn't take tucks in my dresses whenever I'm naughty, as Maria Parks's mother does. My dear, it's really dreadful, for sometimes she's so bad, her frock is up to her knees and she can't come to school. When I think of this degradation, I feel that I can bear even my flat nose and purple gown with yellow skyrockets on it." Meg was Amy's confidant and monitor, and by some strange attraction of opposites, Jo was gentle Beth's. To Jo alone did the shy child tell her thoughts, and over her big, harum-scarum sister, Beth unconsciously exerted more influence than anyone in the family. The two older girls were a great deal to one another, but each took one of the younger into her keeping, and watched over her in her own way. Playing mother, they called it, and put their sisters in the places of the discarded dolls with the maternal instinct of Little Women. "Has anybody got anything to tell? It's been such a dismal day, I'm really dying for some amusement," said Meg, as they sat sewing together that evening. "I had a queer time with Aunt today, and, as I got the best of it, I'll tell you about it," began Jo, who dearly loved to tell stories. "I was reading that everlasting Belsham, and droning away as I always do, for Aunt soon drops off. Then I take out some nice book and read like fury till she wakes up. I actually made myself sleepy, and before she began to nod, I gave such a gape that she asked me what I meant by opening my mouth wide enough to take the whole book in at once. "I wish I could and just be done with it," said I, not trying to be saucy. Then she gave me a long lecture on my sins and told me to sit and think them over while she just lost herself for a moment. She never finds herself very soon, so the minute her cap began to bob, like a top-heavy dahlia, I whipped out the Vicar of Wakefield from my pocket and read away with one eye on him and one eye on Aunt. I had just gotten to where they all tumbled into the water when I forgot and laughed out loud. Aunt woke up and, being more good-natured after her nap, told me to read a bit and show what frivolous work I preferred to the worthy and instructive Belsham. I did my very best, and she liked it, though she only said, "I don't understand what it's all about. Go back and begin it again, child." Back I went and made the primroses as interesting as ever I could. Once I was wicked enough to stop in a thrilling place and say meekly, "I'm afraid it tires you, ma'am. Shan't I stop now?" She caught up her knitting, which had dropped out of her hands, and gave me a sharp look through her spectacles, and said, in her short way, "Finish the chapter, and don't be impertinent, miss." "Did she own that she liked it?" asked Meg. "Oh, bless you, no. But she let old Belsham rest, and when I ran back after my gloves this afternoon, there she was, so hard at the vicar that she didn't hear me laugh as I danced a jig in the hall because of the good time coming. What a pleasant life she might have if she only chose. I don't envy her much, in spite of her money, for after all, rich people have about as many worries as poor ones, I think," added Jo. "That reminds me," said Meg, "that I've got something to tell. It isn't funny like Jo's story, but I thought about it a good deal as I came home. At the King's today I found everybody in a flurry, and one of the children said that her oldest brother had done something dreadful, and Papa had sent him away. I heard Mrs. King crying, and Mr. King talking very loud, and Grace and Ellen turned away their faces when they passed me, so I shouldn't see how red their eyes were. I didn't ask any questions, of course, but I felt so sorry for them, and was rather glad I hadn't any wild brothers to do wicked things and disgrace the family. I think being disgraced in school is a great deal tryinger than anything bad boys can do, said Amy, shaking her head, as if her experience of life had been such a deep one. Susie Perkins came to school today with a lovely red carnelian ring. I wanted it dreadfully, and wished I was her with all my might. Well, she drew a picture of Mr. Davis with a monstrous nose and a hump, and the words, "Young ladies, my eye is upon you," coming out of his mouth in a balloon thing. We were laughing over it when all of a sudden his eye was on us, and he ordered Susie to bring up her slate. She was paralyzed with fright, but she went, and oh, what do you think he did? He took her by the ear, just fancy how horrid, and led her to the recitation platform and made her stand there half an hour holding the slate so everyone could see. "Didn't the girls laugh at the picture?" asked Joe, who relished the scrape. "Laugh? Not one. They sat still as mice, and Susie cried quarts. I know she did. I didn't envy her then, for I felt that millions of carnelian rings wouldn't have made me happy after that. I never should have gotten over such an agonizing mortification." And Amy went on with her work, in the proud consciousness of virtue and the successful utterance of 2 long words in one breath. "I saw something that I liked this morning, and I meant to tell it at dinner, but I forgot," said Beth, putting Joe's topsy-turvy basket in order as she talked. "When I went to get some oysters for Hannah, Mr. Lawrence was in the fish shop, but he didn't see me, for I kept behind a barrel, and he was busy with Mr. Cutter, the fishman. A poor woman came in with a pail and a mop and asked Mr. Cutter if he would let her do some scrubbing for a bit of fish, because she hadn't any dinner for her children and had been disappointed of a day's work. Mr. Cutter was in a hurry and said no, rather crossly, so she was going away looking hungry and sorry when Mr. Lawrence hooked up a big fish with the crooked end of his cane and held it out to her. She was so glad and surprised she took it right into her arms and thanked him over and over. He told her to go along and cook it, and she hurried off, so happy. Wasn't it good of him? Oh, but she did look so funny, hugging the big slippery fish, and hoping Mr. Lawrence's bed in heaven would be aisy. When they had laughed at Beth's story, they asked their mother for one, and after a moment's thought, she said soberly, "As I sat cutting out blue flannel jackets today at the Rooms, I felt very anxious about Father, and thought how lonely and helpless we should be if anything happened to him. It was not a wise thing to do, but I kept on worrying until an old man came in with an order for some clothes. He sat down near me, and I began to talk to him, for he looked poor and tired and anxious. 'Have you sons in the army?' I asked, for the note he brought was not to me. 'Yes, ma'am, I had 4, but 2 were killed. One is a prisoner, and I'm going to the other, who is very sick in a Washington hospital,' he answered quietly. 'You have done a great deal for your country, sir,' I said, feeling respect now instead of pity. 'Not a mite more than I ought, ma'am. I'd go myself if I was any use, but as I ain't, I give my boys, and give 'em free.' He spoke so cheerfully and looked so sincere and seemed so glad to give his all that I was ashamed of myself. I'd given 1 man and thought it too much, while he gave 4 without grudging them. I had all my girls to comfort me at home, and his last son was waiting, miles away, to say goodbye to him, perhaps. I felt so rich, so happy thinking of my blessings, that I made him a nice bundle, gave him some money, and thanked him heartily for the lesson he had taught me." "Tell another story, Mother, one with a moral to it, like this. I like to think about them afterwards, if they are real and not too preachy," said Joe, after a minute's silence. Mrs. March smiled and began at once, for she had told stories to this little audience for many years and knew how to please them. "Once upon a time there were 4 girls who had enough to eat and drink and wear, a good many comforts and pleasures, kind friends, and parents who loved them dearly, and yet they were not contented. Here the listeners stole sly looks at one another and began to sew more diligently. These girls were anxious to be good and made many excellent resolutions, but they did not keep them very well, and were constantly saying, "If only we had this, or if only we could do that," quite forgetting how much they already had, and how many pleasant things they could actually do. So they asked an old woman what spell they could use to make them happy, and she said, "When you feel discontented, think over your blessings and be grateful." Here Jo looked up quickly as if about to speak, but changed her mind, seeing that the story was not yet done. Being sensible girls, they decided to try her advice, and soon were surprised to see how well off they were. One discovered that money couldn't keep shame and sorrow out of rich people's houses. Another that, though she was poor, she was a great deal happier with her youth, health, and good spirits than a certain fretful, feeble old lady who couldn't enjoy her comforts. A third, that disagreeable as it was to help get dinner, it was harder still to have to go begging for it. And the fourth, that even carnelian rings were not so valuable as good behavior. So they agreed to stop complaining, to enjoy the blessings already possessed, and try to deserve them, lest they should be taken away entirely instead of increased. And I believe that they were never disappointed or sorry that they took the old woman's advice. "Now, Marmee, that is very cunning of you to turn our stories against us and give us a sermon instead of a romance," cried Meg. "I like that kind of sermon. It's the sort Father used to tell us," said Beth thoughtfully, putting the needle straight in Jo's pincushion. "I don't complain near as much as the other do, and I shall be more careful than ever now, for I've had a warning from Susie's downfall," said Amy morally. "We needed that lesson, we won't forget it. If we do, you just say to us, as old Chloe did and Uncle Tom, 'Think of your marcies, children. Think of your marcies,'" added Jo, who could not, for the life of her, help getting a morsel of fun out of the little sermon, though she took it to heart as much as any of them. Chapter 5. Being Neighborly. "What in the world are you going to do now, Jo?" asked Meg one snowy afternoon, as her sister came tramping through the hall, in rubber boots, old sack, and hood, with a broom in one hand and a shovel in the other. "I'm going out for exercise," answered Jo, with a mischievous winkle in her eyes. "I should think that 2 long walks this morning would have been enough. It's cold and dull out, and I advise you to stay warm and dry by the fire, as I do," said Meg, with a shiver. "Never take advice. Can't keep still all day, and not being a pussycat, I don't like to doze by the fire. I like adventures, and I'm going to find some." Meg went back to toasting her feet and reading Ivanhoe, and Jo began to dig paths with great energy. The snow was light, and with her broom she soon swept a path all round the garden, for Beth to walk in when the sun came out and the invalid dolls needed air. Now the garden separated the Marches' house from that of Mr. Lawrence. Both stood in a suburb of the city which was still country-like, with groves and lawns, large gardens, and quiet streets. A low hedge parted the 2 estates. On one side was an old brown house, looking rather bare and shabby, robbed of the vines that in summer covered its walls, and the flowers which then surrounded it. On the other side was a stately stone mansion, plainly betokening every sort of comfort and luxury, from the big coach-house and well-kept grounds to the conservatory and the glimpses of lovely things one caught between the rich curtains. Yet it seemed a lonely, lifeless sort of house, for no children frolicked on its lawn, no motherly face ever smiled out the windows, and few people went in and out except for the old gentleman and his grandson. To Jo's lively fancy, this fine house seemed a kind of enchanted palace, full of splendors and delights which no one enjoyed. She had long wanted to behold these hidden glories, and to get to know the Lawrence boy, who looked as if he would like to be known, if only he knew how to begin. Since the party, she had been more eager than ever, and had planned many ways of making friends with him. But he had not been seen lately, and Jo began to think he had gone away, when she one day spied a brown face at the upper window, looking wistfully down into their garden, where Beth and Amy were snowballing one another. "That boy is suffering for society and fun," she said to herself. "His grandpa does not know what's good for him and keeps him shut up all alone. He needs a party of jolly boys to play with, or someone young and lively. I have a great mind to go over and tell the old gentleman so." This idea amused Joe greatly, who liked to do daring things and was always scandalizing Meg by her queer performances. The plan of going over was not forgotten, and when the snowy afternoon came, Joe resolved to try what could be done. She saw Mr. Lawrence drive off, and then sallied to dig her way out and down the hedge, where she paused and took a survey. All quiet, curtains down to lower windows, servants out of sight, and nothing human visible but a curly black head leaning on a thin hand at the upper window. There he is, thought Joe. Poor boy, all alone and sick this dismal day. It's a shame. I'll toss up the snowball and make him look out, and then I'll say a kind word to him. Up went a handful of soft snow, and the head turned at once, showing a face which lost its listless look in a minute, as the big eyes brightened and the mouth began to smile. Joe nodded and laughed and flourished her broom as she called out, "How do you do? Are you sick?" Laurie opened the window and croaked out as hoarsely as a raven, "Better, thank you. I've had a bad cold and been shut up all week." "I'm sorry. What do you amuse yourself with?" "Nothing. It's dull as tombs up here." "Don't you read?" "Not very much. They won't let me." "Can't somebody read to you?" "Grandpa does sometimes, but my books don't interest him, and I hate to ask Brooke all the time." "Have someone come and see you then?" "There isn't anyone I'd like to see. Boys make such a row, and my head is weak." "Isn't there some nice girl who'd read to and amuse you? Girls are quiet and like to play nurse." "Don't know any." "You know us," began Joe, then laughed and stopped. "So I do. Will you come up, please?" cried Laurie. "I'm not quiet and nice, but I'll come if Mother will let me. I'll go ask her. Shut that window like a good boy and wait until I come up." With that, Joe shouldered her broom and marched into the house, wondering what they would all say to her. Laurie was in a flutter of excitement at the idea of having company, and flew about to get ready, for, as Mrs. March said, he was a little gentleman, and did honor to the coming guest by brushing out his curly pate, putting on a fresh collar, and trying to tidy up the room, which, in spite of half a dozen servants, was anything but tidy. Presently there came a loud ring, and a decided voice asking for Mr. Laurie, and a surprised-looking servant came running up to announce a young lady. "All right, show her up. It's Miss Joe," said Laurie, going to the door of his little parlor to meet Joe, who appeared, looking rosy and kind and quite at her ease, with a covered dish in one hand and Beth's 3 kittens in the other. "Here I am, bag and baggage," she said briskly. "Mother sends her love and was glad if I could do anything for you. Meg wanted me to bring some of her blancmange. She makes it very nicely, and Beth thought her cats would be comforting. I knew you'd laugh at them, but I couldn't refuse. She was so anxious to do something." It so happened that Beth's funny loan was just the thing, for in laughing over the kits, Laurie forgot his bashfulness and grew sociable at once. "That looks much too pretty to eat," he said, smiling with pleasure as Joe uncovered the dish and showed the blancmange, surrounded by a garland of green leaves and the scarlet flowers of Amy's pet geranium. "It isn't anything, only they all felt kindly and wanted to show it. Tell the girl to put it away for your tea. It's so simple you can eat it, and being soft, it will slip down without hurting your sore throat. What a cozy room this is!" "It might be if it was kept nice, but the maids are lazy, and I don't know how to make them mind. It worries me, though." "I'll write it up in 2 minutes, for it only needs to have the hearth brushed so, and the things made straight on the mantelpiece so, and the books put here and the bottles there, and your sofa turned from the lights, and the pillows plumped up a bit. Now then, you're fixed." So he was, for as she laughed and talked, Joe had whisked things into place and given quite a different air to the room. Laurie watched her in respectful silence, and when she beckoned him to his sofa, he sat down with a sigh of satisfaction, saying gratefully, "How kind you are. Yes, that's what it wanted. Now please take the big chair and let me do something to amuse my company." "No, I came to amuse you." "Shall I read aloud?" said Joe, and looked affectionately toward some inviting books nearby. "Thank you, but I've read all those, and if you don't mind, I'd rather talk," answered Laurie. "Not a bit. I'll talk all day if you only set me going. Beth says I never know when to stop." Is Beth the rosy one, who stays at home a good deal and sometimes goes out with the little basket?" asked Laurie with interest. "Yes, that's Beth. She's my girl, and a regular good one she is, too. The pretty one is Meg, and the curly-haired one is Amy, I believe. How did you find that out?" Laurie colored up, but answered frankly. "Why, you see, I often hear you calling to one another, and when I'm alone up here, I can't help but looking over at your house. You always seem to be having such good times. I beg your pardon for being so rude, but sometimes you forget to put down the curtain at the window where the flowers are, and when the lamps are lighted, it's like looking at a picture to see the fire, and you all round the table with your mother. Her face is right opposite, and it looks so sweet behind the flowers, I can't help but watching it. I haven't got any mother, you know," and Laurie poked the fire to hide a little twitching of the lips that he could not control. The solitary, hungry look in his eyes went straight to Jo's warm heart. She had been so simply taught that there was no nonsense in her head, and at 15 she was as innocent and frank as any child. Laurie was sick and lonely, and feeling how rich she was in a home full of love and happiness. She gladly tried to share it with him. Her face was very friendly, and her sharp voice unusually gentle, as she said, "We'll never draw that curtain any more, and I give you leave to look as much as you like. I just wish, though, instead of peeping, you'd come over to see us. Mother is so splendid, and she'd do you heaps of good, and Beth would sing to you if I begged her to, and Amy would dance. Meg and I would make you laugh over our funny stage properties, and we'd have jolly times. Wouldn't your grandpa let you?" "I think he would if your mother asked him. He's very kind, although he does not look it, and he lets me do what I like pretty much. Only he's afraid I might be bother to strangers," began Laurie, brightening more and more. "We are not strangers, we are neighbors, and you needn't think you'd be a bother. We want to know you, and I've been trying to do this ever so long. We haven't been here in a great while, you know, but we have got acquainted with all of our neighbors but you. You see, Grandpa lives among his books and doesn't mind much what happens outside. Mr. Brooke, my tutor, doesn't stay here, you know, and I have no one to go about with me, so I just stop at home and get on as I can. That's bad. You ought to make an effort and go visiting everywhere you are asked. Then you'll have plenty of friends and pleasant places to go to. Never mind being bashful. It won't last long if you keep on going." Laurie turned red again, but wasn't offended at being accused of bashfulness, for there was so much goodwill in Jo, it was impossible not to take her blunt speeches as kindly as they were meant. "Do you like your school?" asked the boy, changing the subject after a little pause, during which he stared at the fire, and Jo looked about her, well pleased. "Don't go to school. I'm a businessman. Girl, I mean. I go to wait on my great-aunt, and a dear cross old soul she is, too," answered Jo. Laurie opened his mouth to ask another question, but remembering just in time that it wasn't manners to make too many inquiries into people's affairs, he shut it again, and looked uncomfortable. Jo liked his good breeding and didn't mind having a laugh at Aunt March, so she gave him a lively description of the fidgety old lady, her fat poodle, the parrot that talked in Spanish, and the library where she reveled. Laurie enjoyed that immensely, and when she told about the prim old gentleman who came once to woo Aunt March, and in the middle of a fine speech, how Polly had tweaked his wig off to his great dismay, the boy lay back and laughed until the tears ran down his cheeks, and a maid popped her head in to see what was the matter. "Oh, that does me no end of good. Tell on, please," he said, taking his face out of the sofa cushion, red and shining with merriment. Much elated with her success, Jo did "tell on" all about their plays and plans, their hopes and fears for father, and the most interesting events of the little world in which the sisters lived. Then they got to talking about books, and to Jo's delight, she found that Laurie loved them as well as she did, and had read even more than herself. "If you like them so much, come down and see ours. Grandpa is out, so you needn't be afraid," said Laurie, getting up. "I'm not afraid of anything," returned Jo, with a toss of her head. "I don't believe you are," exclaimed the boy, looking at her with much admiration, though he privately thought she would have good reason to be a trifle afraid of the old gentleman if she met him in one of his moods. The atmosphere of the whole house being summer-like, Laurie led the way from room to room, letting Jo stop to examine whatever struck her fancy. And so at last they came to the library, where she clapped her hands and pranced, as she always did when especially delighted. It was lined with books, and there were pictures and statues and distracting little cabinets full of coins and curiosities, and sleepy hollow chairs, and queer tables and bronzes, and best of all, a great open fireplace with quaint tiles all around it. "What richness!" sighed Jo, sinking into the depth of a velvet chair, and gazing about her with an air of intense satisfaction. "Theodore Lawrence, you ought to be the happiest boy in the world," she added impressively. "A fellow can't live only on books," said Laurie, shaking his head as he perched on a table opposite. Before he could say more, a bell rang, and Jo flew up, exclaiming with alarm, "Mercy me, it's your grandpa." "Well, what if it is? You're not afraid of anything, you know," returned the boy, looking wicked. "I think I am a little bit afraid of him, but I don't know why I should be. Marmee said I might come, and I don't think you're any the worse for it," said Jo, composing herself, though she kept her eyes on the door. "I'm a great deal better for it, and ever so much obliged. I'm only afraid you are very tired talking to me. It was so pleasant, I couldn't bear to stop," said Laurie gratefully. "The doctor to see you, sir," and the maid beckoned as she spoke. "Would you mind if I left you for a minute? I suppose I must see him," said Laurie. "Don't mind me. I'm as happy as a cricket here," answered Jo. Laurie went away, and his guest amused herself in her own way. She was standing before a fine portrait of the old gentleman when the door opened again, and without turning, she said decidedly, "I'm sure now that I shouldn't be afraid of him, for he's got kind eyes, though his mouth is grim, and he looks as if he had a tremendous will of his own. He isn't as handsome as my grandfather, but I like him anyway." "Thank you, ma'am," said a gruff voice behind her, and there, to her great dismay, stood old Mr. Lawrence. Poor Jo blushed till she couldn't blush any redder, and her heart began to beat uncomfortably fast as she thought about what she had said. For a minute, a wild desire to run away possessed her, but that was cowardly, and the girls would laugh at her. So she resolved to stay and get out of the scrape as best as she could. A second look showed her that the living eyes, under the bushy gray eyebrows, were kinder even than the painted ones, and there was a slight twinkle in them, which lessened her fear a great deal. The gruff voice was gruffer than ever, as the old gentleman said abruptly, after the dreadful pause, "So you're not afraid of me, eh?" "Not much, sir." "And you don't think me as handsome as your own grandfather?" "Not quite, sir." "And I've got a tremendous will, have I?" "I only said I thought so." "But you like me, in spite of it?" "Yes, I do, sir." That answer pleased the old gentleman. He gave a short laugh, shook hands with her, and putting his finger under her chin, turned up her face, examined it gravely, and let it go, saying with a nod, "You've got your grandfather's spirit, if you haven't his face. He was a fine man, my dear, but what is better, he was a brave and an honest one, and I was proud to be his friend." "Thank you, sir." And Jo was quite comfortable after that, for it suited her exactly. "What have you been doing with this boy of mine, hey?" was the next question, sharply put. "Only trying to be neighborly, sir," and Jo told how her visit came to be. "You think he needs cheering up a bit, do you?" "Yes, sir, he seems a bit lonely, and young folks would do him good, perhaps. We are only girls, but we should be glad to help if we could, for we don't forget the splendid Christmas present that you sent us," said Jo. "Tut, tut, that was a boy's affair. How is the poor woman?" "Doing nicely, sir," and off went Jo, talking very fast as she told all about the Hummels, in whom her mother had interested richer friends than they were. "Just her father's way of doing good. I shall come and see your mother some fine day. Tell her so. Oh, there's the tea bell. We have it early on the boy's account. Come down and go on being neighborly." "If you'd like to have me, sir." "Shouldn't ask you if I didn't," and Mr. Lawrence offered her his arm with old-fashioned courtesy. What would Meg say to this, thought Jo, as she was being marched away, while her eyes danced with fun as she imagined herself telling the story at home. "Why, what the dickens has come to the fellow?" said the old gentleman, as Laurie came running downstairs, and brought up with a start of surprise at the astonishing sight of Jo, arm in arm, with his redoubtable grandfather. "I didn't know you'd come, sir," he began, as Joe gave him a triumphant little glance. "That's evident by the way you racket down the stairs. Come to your tea, sir, and behave like a gentleman." And having pulled the boy's hair by way of a caress, Mr. Lawrence walked on, while Laurie went through a series of comic evolutions behind their backs, which nearly produced an explosion of laughter from Joe. The old gentleman did not say much as he drank his 4 cups of tea, but he watched the young people, who soon chatted away like old friends, and the change in his grandson did not escape him. There was color, light, and life in the boy's face now, vivacity in his manner, and a genuine merriment in his laugh. "She's right. The lad is lonely. I'll see what these little girls can do for him," thought Mr. Lawrence, as he looked and listened. He liked Joe, for her odd blunt ways suited him, and she seemed to understand the boy almost as well as if she had been one herself. If the Lawrences had been what Joe called prim and poky, she would not have got on at all, for such people always made her shy and awkward. But finding them free and easy, she was so herself, and made a good impression. When they rose, she proposed to go, but Laurie said he had something more to show her, and took her away to the conservatory, which had been lighted for her benefit. It seemed quite fairy-like to Joe, as she went up and down the walks, enjoying the blooming walls on either side, the soft light, the damp sweet air, and the wonderful vines and trees that hung about her, while her new friend cut the finest of flowers until his hands were full. Then he tied them up, saying, with a happy look Joe liked to see, "Please give these to your mother, and tell her I liked the medicine she sent me very much." They found Mr. Lawrence standing before the fire in the great drawing-room, but Joe's attention was entirely absorbed by a grand piano, which stood open. "Do you play?" she asked, turning to Laurie with a respectful expression. "Sometimes," he answered modestly. "Please do now. I want to hear it so I can tell Beth." "Won't you first?" "Don't know how. Too stupid to learn. But I love music dearly." So Laurie played, and Joe listened, with her nose luxuriating, buried in a heliotrope and tea roses. Her respect and regard for the Lawrence boy increased very much, for he played remarkably well and didn't put on any airs. She wished Beth could hear him, but she did not say so, only praised him till he was quite abashed, and his grandfather came to the rescue. "That will do, young lady. Too many sugar plums are not good for him. His music isn't bad, and I hope he will do as well in more important things." "Going? Well, I'm much obliged to you, and I hope you'll come again. My respects to your mother. Good night, Dr. Joe." He shook hands kindly, and looked as if something did not please him. When they got into the hall, Joe asked Laurie if she had said anything amiss. He shook his head. "No, it was me. He doesn't like to hear me play." "Why not?" "I'll tell you some day. John is going home with you, as I cannot." "No need of that. I am not a young lady, and it's only a step. Take care of yourself, won't you?" "Yes, but you will come again, I hope?" "If you promise to come and see us after you are well." "I will. Good night, Laurie." "Good night, Joe. Good night." When all the afternoon's adventures had been told, the family felt inclined to go visiting in a body, for each found something very attractive in the big house on the other side of the hedge. Mrs. March wanted to talk of her father with the old man who had not forgotten him. Meg longed to walk in the conservatory. Beth sighed for the grand piano, and Amy was eager to see all the fine pictures and statues. "Mother, why didn't Mr. Lawrence like to have Laurie play?" asked Joe, who was of an inquiring disposition. "I'm not sure, but I think it was because his son, Laurie's father, married an Italian lady, a musician, which displeased the old man, who was very proud. The lady was good and lovely and accomplished, but he did not like her, and never saw his son after he married. They both died when Laurie was a little child, and then his grandfather took him home. I fancy the boy, who was born in Italy, is not very strong, and the old man is afraid of losing him, which makes him so careful. Laurie comes naturally by his love of music, for he is like his mother, and I dare say his grandfather fears that he may want to be a musician. At any rate, his skill reminds him of the woman he did not like, and so he glowered, as Joe said. "Dear me, how romantic!" exclaimed Meg. "How silly," said Joe. "Let him be a musician if he wants to, and not plague his life out by sending him to college when he so hates to go. That's why he has such handsome black eyes and pretty manners, I suppose. Italians are always nice, said Meg, who was a little sentimental. What do you know about his eyes and manners? You never spoke to him hardly, cried Joe, who was most assuredly not sentimental. I saw him at the party, and what you tell shows that he knows how to behave. That was a nice little speech about the medicine Mother sent him. He meant the blancmange, I suppose. How stupid you are! He meant you, of course. Did he? And Joe opened her eyes as if it had never occurred to her before. I never saw such a girl. You don't even know a compliment when you get it, said Meg, with the air of a young lady who knew all about the matter. I think they are great nonsense, and I'll thank you to not be silly and spoil my fun. Laurie's a nice boy, and I like him, and I won't have any sentimental stuff about compliments and such rubbish. We'll all be good to him because he hasn't got any mother, and he may come over to see us, mayn't he, Marmee? Yes, Joe, your friend is very welcome, and I hope Meg will remember that children should be children for as long as they can. I don't call myself a child, and I'm not in my teens yet, observed Amy. What do you say, Beth? I was thinking about our Pilgrim's Progress, answered Beth, who had not heard a word. How we got out of the slough and through the wicket gate by resolving to be good, and up the steep hill by trying, and that maybe the house over there, full of splendid things, is going to be our Palace Beautiful. We have to get by the lions first, said Joe, as if she rather enjoyed the prospect.